Betrayed and humiliated for her poverty, Lady Eleanor clutched her mother's silver pendant as she stood frozen in Castle Highworth's grand hall, her heart shattering into 1,000 pieces. The once promising journey to meet her betrothed had transformed into a nightmare of rejection that would forever change her fate, though she couldn't yet imagine how a knight's compassion would soon heal her wounded spirit. Eleanor's fingers trembled against the cool metal of her family's only heirloom as she approached the dais where Lord Percival awaited. The grand hall of Castle Highworth buzzed with whispers and laughter, nobles in vibrant spring finery casting curious glances her way. Banners of crimson and gold fluttered in the gentle breeze from high windows, while musicians played delicate melodies that seemed to mock her racing heart. "My lord," she whispered, dropping into a curtsy before the tall, handsome nobleman she had been promised to since childhood. Her modest blue gown, though her finest, felt suddenly inadequate among the jewel-encrusted ladies of court. Lord Percival's eyes narrowed as they swept over her plain attire, lingering disapprovingly on her travel-worn appearance. His jaw tightened, nostrils flaring slightly. "This is the bride?" he asked coldly, addressing not her but the royal steward who had accompanied her. "This simple creature in homespun wool?" The steward shifted uncomfortably. "Lady Eleanor of Rosewood." "My lord, as arranged," Percival scoffed, the sound cutting through Eleanor like a blade. "I was promised a lady with a dowry befitting my station, not some pauper's daughter with nothing but—" His gaze flicked dismissively to her pendant, trinkets to her name. Blood rushed to Eleanor's cheeks, burning against her pale skin. The hall had quieted, dozens of eyes watching her humiliation unfold. "My lord," she began, voice barely audible, "my father's lands suffered poor harvests, but my dowry includes—" "Includes what?" Percival interrupted sharply. "Barren fields and empty promises. The agreement is void." He turned to the gathered. "Court," raising his voice. "Let it be known that Lord Percival of Highworth rejects this match. I'll not bind myself to poverty." Stunned silence fell across the hall before whispers erupted like wildfire. Eleanor stood rooted to the stone floor, unable to move as her future crumbled before her. 3 weeks of travel, her family's last resources spent on this journey, all for public rejection. "Where shall we lodge the lady?" a servant quietly asked the steward. Percival waved dismissively. "That is no longer my concern. She arrived uninvited and unwanted." Eleanor's vision blurred with unshed tears as she backed. Away from the dais, dignity the only possession she could still claim. Outside, thunder rumbled across distant hills, matching the storm building within her chest. "You have until morning," Percival called after her, "to find your way elsewhere." Dark clouds gathered over Castle Highworth as Eleanor huddled beneath the meagre shelter of an alcove in the courtyard. Her fingers traced the worn silver pendant at her throat, the last connection to a life that seemed impossibly distant now. Servants hurried past, casting curious glances her way. The rejected bride, a curiosity to be whispered about, but not approached. The first heavy raindrops struck the cobblestones, raising earthy scents from the dust. Eleanor clutched her small travel sack closer, knowing it contained nothing of value to trade for lodging. No coin, no jewels, nothing but a spare dress and her mother's prayer book. Night approached swiftly, and with it, the crushing reality of her situation. "My lady, you'll catch your death in this weather." The deep voice startled her. A tall knight stood before her, raindrops glistening on his dark cloak. His face was weathered but kind, framed by closely cropped chestnut hair, streaked with silver at the temples. "I'm quite well, sir," Eleanor replied stiffly, pride forcing strength into her voice, despite the trembling of her lips. The knight's gaze was steady, assessing. "I witnessed what happened in the great hall. Lord Percival's behavior was unworthy of his station." Heat rushed to Eleanor's cheeks. "You needn't concern yourself with my affairs." Sir Gareth of Ravenwood, he introduced himself with a slight bow, ignoring her dismissal. And you require shelter for the night, at minimum. Thunder rumbled overhead as the rain intensified, drumming against the courtyard stones. A flash of lightning illuminated the concern in Sir Gareth's eyes. I shall manage, Eleanor insisted, though her heart raced with growing desperation. My estate lies half a day's ride from here, Sir Gareth continued. I offer you proper lodging until you determine your path forward. My housekeeper will ensure all proprieties are observed. Eleanor studied him warily. After Lord Percival's cruelty, how could she trust another nobleman's offer? Why would you help me? She asked, voice barely audible above the rain. A shadow crossed Sir Gareth's features. Perhaps because I recognize injustice when I witness it, or perhaps because no lady should be abandoned to the elements through no fault of her own. The rain had soaked through her cloak now, chilling her to the bone. Pride warred with necessity. I cannot repay your kindness, she admitted reluctantly. Sir Gareth's expression softened. I ask nothing in return but the chance to right a wrong done this day. As lightning flashed again across the darkening sky, Eleanor made her choice. One night of shelter. What harm could it bring compared to the dangers that awaited her here? Well, Sir Gareth, she whispered, I accept your offer. Ravenwood emerged from morning mist like an ancient guardian, less grand than Castle Highworth, but possessing a weathered dignity that spoke of generations rather than mere wealth. Stone walls covered with climbing ivy stood sentinel around a central courtyard, where servants moved with purposeful steps. Eleanor observed it all from horseback, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten as she studied what would be her temporary refuge. It isn't a palace, Sir Gareth remarked, noting her gaze as he helped her dismount, but it has stood against time and troubles alike. It has character, Eleanor replied softly, wincing as her feet touched ground after the long night's ride. More honest than gilded halls. A stout woman with silver-streaked hair hurried from the main entrance, her practical woolen dress and ring of keys marking her position before introductions were made. Matilda, Sir Gareth called. Lady Eleanor of Rosewood will be our guest. Please prepare the east chamber. The housekeeper's shrewd eyes assessed Eleanor with undisguised curiosity. Of course, my lord. The chamber awaits fresh linens. She dipped in a perfunctory curtsy before addressing Eleanor directly. You'll be wanting a bath drawn, I expect, after such a journey? The kindness in her practical tone brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. She blinked them away quickly. Yes, thank you. Later, scrubbed clean and dressed in a borrowed night shift, Eleanor sat before the chamber's small hearth, while Matilda combed the tangles from her damp hair. The rhythmic motion reminded her painfully of her mother's tender ministrations in childhood. Sir Gareth is a good man, Matilda said suddenly, breaking their comfortable silence. Honourable to his core. Eleanor tensed slightly. I'm certain he is, but you've no reason to trust that, have you? The older woman's voice held no judgment. Not after what that pompous lord did. Sir Gareth has been kind, Eleanor admitted cautiously, though I cannot fathom why. Matilda's hands paused in their work. Some men measure worth by coin and title, others by character. The master judges people by what lies within. A gentle knock interrupted them. Sir Gareth's voice came through the door. Lady Eleanor, I trust you're settling in. Might I have a word when convenient? Eleanor's heart quickened. Here it came, the price for his charity. A moment, my lord, she called, gesturing frantically for Matilda to help with a shawl. When the door opened, Sir Gareth remained respectfully in the corridor. I merely wish to inform you that Ravenwood's hospitality is yours for as long as needed. His eyes met hers directly. No conditions, no expectations. Something in his steady gaze made Eleanor wonder if perhaps, just perhaps, there existed men whose kindness came without hidden cost. Dawn at Ravenwood painted the estate in gentle gold, a world away from Castle Highworth's cold grandeur. 1 week had passed since Eleanor's arrival, each day bringing less of the tight anxiety that had coiled in her chest since Lord Percival's rejection. This morning she wandered the kitchen gardens, fingertips brushing rosemary and thyme as she breathed in their sharp, comforting scents. "You've a good eye for herbs," remarked Agnes, the cook's assistant, kneeling nearby to harvest early spring onions. "Most noble ladies couldn't tell mint from poison." Eleanor smiled faintly. "My mother taught me. Our kitchens at Rosewood were modest, but her herb garden was her pride." The memory brought both warmth and a pang of homesickness. "I helped tend it from childhood," Agnes nodded approvingly. "Perhaps you'd help sort today's pickings. Cook's hands pain her in the mornings." By midday, Eleanor found herself in Ravenwood's bustling kitchen, sleeves rolled above her elbows, fingers stained green as she sorted and bundled herbs with unexpected joy. The familiar work anchored her when everything else felt adrift. "Lady Eleanor," came Sir Gareth's surprised voice from the doorway. She straightened quickly, suddenly conscious of her dishevelled appearance. "Sir Gareth, I was just making yourself useful, I see." His smile held no mockery, only approval. "Though you're my guest, not my servant." "Idleness breeds melancholy," she replied, meeting his eyes with new steadiness, "and I find comfort in useful tasks." The following days revealed more of Ravenwood's character, and Sir Gareth's. She discovered his steady presence in the stables, each morning where he personally inspected his prized destriers. Unlike other noblemen who considered such work beneath them, Sir Gareth seemed most at ease among horses and working folk alike. One afternoon, finding him struggling with a restless young mare, Eleanor approached cautiously. "May I?" she asked, extending her hand toward the nervous animal. Sir Gareth's eyebrows rose, but he stepped aside. "She's not usually gentle with strangers." Eleanor hummed softly, a melody her father once used to calm skittish colts. The mare's ears flicked forward, tension gradually easing from her powerful body. "You continue to surprise me, Lady Eleanor," Sir Gareth said quietly. She felt his gaze upon her, not appraising her worth like Lord Percival had done, but seeing her, truly seeing her skills and strength. "I've had little opportunity to be anything but practical," she admitted, stroking the mare's velvet muzzle. "Perhaps that's why Lord Percival found me lacking." "Then Lord Percival is blind as well as foolish," Gareth replied, his voice carrying such conviction that Eleanor's heart quickened unexpectedly beneath her modest bodice. The village market bustled with spring commerce, colourful awnings fluttering in the breeze as merchants called their wares. Eleanor moved among the stalls with growing confidence, a basket over her arm filled with herbs she'd harvested from Ravenwood's gardens. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival, each day bringing a deeper sense of belonging that both comforted and frightened her. "Lady Eleanor?" A cultured voice cut through the market's cheerful clamour. Eleanor turned to find an elegantly dressed woman, watching her with undisguised curiosity. Her gown of deep burgundy silk marked her as nobility, as did the attendant hovering discreetly. Behind her, "I am Lady Catherine of Thornfield," the woman announced, her smile not quite reaching her calculating eyes. "I was at court when your unfortunate situation with Lord Percival unfolded." Heat rose in Eleanor's cheeks. "A pleasure, my lady," she managed, though pleasure was far from what she felt. "Imagine my surprise to discover you've taken up residence with Sir Gareth," Lady Catherine continued, voice lowered conspiratorially. "The court buzzes with such interesting speculation." Eleanor's fingers tightened around her basket. "Sir Gareth offered me shelter when I had nowhere else to turn," His kindness deserves respect, not idle gossip. Lady Catherine's eyebrow arched delicately. Kindness, is it? How quaint, though perhaps unwise for both your reputations. She leaned closer. Lord Percival himself has commented that the knight seems to have collected his discarded bride like a trinket from the roadside. Ice replaced the heat in Eleanor's veins. Sir Gareth has been nothing but honourable. Of course, dear, though honour rarely survives court whispers. Lady Catherine sighed theatrically. Such a pity for Sir Gareth. He's managed to maintain the king's favour despite his humble circumstances. These rumours could damage years of loyal service. The market's cheerful sounds faded around Eleanor as the implications sank in. Sir Gareth, kind, honourable Gareth, having his reputation sullied because of her presence in his home. I should return to Ravenwood, Eleanor said stiffly, unable to bear another moment of Lady Catherine's thinly veiled insinuations. Do give Sir Gareth my regards, Lady Catherine called after her, and perhaps consider whether your continued presence serves him well. The journey back to Ravenwood passed in a blur, Lady Catherine's words echoing painfully. Sir Gareth had rescued her from humiliation and offered sanctuary without condition. How could she repay such kindness by becoming the source of his disgrace? By evening, as she watched him speaking kindly with his stable master, Eleanor made her decision. She would not be the cause of his ruin. Whatever the cost to her heart, she must leave Ravenwood. Eleanor folded her few belongings with trembling hands, her small travel sack a meagre testament to her existence. Matilda had noticed her preparations, but said nothing, only pressed her, lips together, in silent disapproval. The sun hung low on the horizon as Eleanor slipped outside for one last walk through the grounds that had become so dear to her. Her feet carried her to the ancient oak grove beyond the eastern meadow. Massive trunks twisted skyward, their new spring leaves gilded by sunset. This peaceful sanctuary had become her refuge during troubled thoughts. Tonight would be her final visit. I thought I might find you here. Sir Gareth's voice startled her. He stood among the dappled shadows, his usual armour absent, dressed simply in a linen shirt and riding breeches. Matilda told me of your packing, he said quietly. May I ask why? Eleanor's throat tightened. I encountered Lady Catherine in the village today. The court speaks of us, of my presence here. It damages your standing, and you would leave to protect me. It wasn't a question. Your reputation is mine to risk, he interrupted gently, though I'm touched by your concern. He gestured to a fallen log, inviting her to sit. As they settled side by side, the grove deepened into purple. Twilight. I was 16 when my father disowned me, Gareth said suddenly, his voice low. The third son of the Duke of Westmoreland, destined for political marriage to unite our houses with the Pendrakes. Eleanor stared at him in shock. You're of ducal blood? A sad smile touched his lips. I was, until I rejected the bride they chose. A cruel girl who tormented servants for sport, and pledged my sword to the king's service instead. His fingers absently traced a scar on his forearm. My father declared me dead to the family that very night. That's why you recognized my plight, Eleanor whispered. Gareth nodded, his eyes reflecting the first emerging stars. Ravenwood was a minor holding, gifted for service in battle. Not the duchy I was born to, but earned through my own merit. His hand found hers in the gathering darkness, warm and calloused from years of swordplay. When I saw you standing alone in that courtyard, I recognized the look of someone whose world had been torn away through no fault of their own. I had no idea, Eleanor murmured. We are both refugees of a sort, Gareth said softly. Perhaps that's why Ravenwood feels more complete with you in it. The simple words, spoken without guile or expectation, anchored themselves in Eleanor's heart. In the sacred quiet of the ancient grove, something fragile and precious blossomed between them, an understanding deeper than words. amber and crimson leaves danced on crisp autumn air as Eleanor arranged the final herbs in her display. Months had transformed her from Castle Highworth's rejected bride to Ravenwood's respected herbalist, her remedies sought by villagers far and wide. The harvest festival buzzed with laughter and music around her, a celebration of bounty after seasons of growth. "Your table draws more visitors than the alesmith," Gareth remarked, appearing at her side with 2 steaming cups of spiced cider. His eyes held the warmth that had become familiar over their shared months, a quiet affection that needed no declaration. Eleanor accepted the drink gratefully, her fingers brushing his. "The villagers have been kind to a stranger." "You're hardly a stranger now," he replied, nodding toward a group of village women who waved cheerfully in Eleanor's direction. "You've earned their respect through your own merit." Pride swelled in her chest, not the brittle pride of nobility, but something stronger built on genuine accomplishment. She touched the silver pendant at her throat, now a symbol of where she'd come from rather than all she'd lost. As evening approached, musicians struck up a lively tune. Gareth extended his hand. "Would you honor me with a dance, Lady Eleanor?" The circle of dancers welcomed them as Gareth led her through steps she'd learned from the village women. His hand at her waist was respectful yet possessive, his smile unguarded in a way she'd never seen at their first meeting. "You dance with considerably more enthusiasm than court nobles," she teased, breathless from the spirited movements. "Perhaps because my partner inspires genuine joy," he returned, his gaze lingering on her flushed face. The music halted abruptly. Conversations died as attention shifted toward the village green's entrance. There, mounted on a magnificent charger, adorned with Highworth's colours, sat Lord Percival. His cold eyes found Eleanor immediately, narrowing as they took in her simple but becoming attire, her hand still clasped in Gareth's. "How charming!" Percival drawled, dismounting with deliberate grace. "The rejected bride finds solace with the disowned knight, a fitting match of discards." Gareth stiffened beside her, but Eleanor squeezed his hand in warning. This was her battle. "Lord Percival," she acknowledged with a calm that surprised even herself, "what brings you to our humble celebration?" "Our?" Percival's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You speak as if you belong here." "Because she does," Gareth stated firmly. Something dangerous flashed across Percival's face, calculation mingled with determination. "I've come to rectify a hasty decision, Lady Eleanor. My household requires a proper lady's touch." His gaze swept dismissively over Ravenwood's knight before returning to her. "I'm prepared to honor our original betrothal." Rain lashed against the leaded windows of Ravenwood's great hall, nature's fury matching the storm brewing inside. Lord Percival stood before the hearth, water still dripping from his fine cloak onto the rushes covering the stone floor. Behind him, 4 of his men-at-arms lingered near the doorway, their presence an unspoken threat in Gareth's domain. "You arrive uninvited during a downpour to discuss marriage?" Gareth's voice remained measured, though Eleanor could see the tension in his jaw as he stood beside her. "Curious timing, Lord Percival." Percival's smile was thin as a blade. "When a man recognizes his error, haste is prudent." His gaze shifted to Eleanor, a possessive gleam in his eyes that made her skin crawl. "I've come to formally reinstate our betrothal, Lady Eleanor. The preparations for our wedding will begin immediately." Thunder crashed outside, punctuating his presumption. Eleanor's fingers curled into fists at her sides. "You rejected me," she reminded him, each word carrying the weight of that public humiliation. "Before the entire court, you declared me unworthy." "A regrettable lapse in judgment," Percival conceded smoothly. "One I'm prepared to overlook, as you should overlook my hastiness." "Overlook," Eleanor echoed, incredulous. "You left me without Shelter or protection. Had Sir Gareth not intervened, I might have perished that very night. Percival's expression hardened. Yet here you stand, quite alive and apparently comfortable in your circumstances. His gaze swept dismissively around Ravenwood's modest hall. Though surely you cannot prefer this to Highworth's splendor? I prefer honor to splendor, Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She felt Gareth shift beside her, but couldn't risk looking at him, afraid of what his expression might reveal. Honor? Percival laughed coldly. Is that what you call living unchaperoned with a man to whom you're not wed? The court has other words for it. Gareth took a step forward, but Eleanor placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was her battle to fight. I am the same woman you rejected, Lord Percival, she said, lifting her chin. My dowry hasn't increased. My lineage hasn't changed. The only difference is that now others recognize my worth. Including our knight, Percival observed with dangerous softness. How touching! Rain drummed against the roof as Eleanor stood at the crossroads of her life. Behind her lay the safety of her old dreams, the security of Highworth's wealth. Before her stretched an uncertain future, but one where she might be valued for herself alone. I require your answer, Lady Eleanor, Percival demanded, extending his hand. Will you fulfill your family's wishes and honor our betrothal? Dawn painted Ravenwood's herb garden in gentle gold as Eleanor knelt among the plants she'd tended since spring. Her fingers moved mechanically, pinching dead leaves, her mind elsewhere. Lord Percival's demand, had been met, with her request for 1 day's consideration. 1 day to choose between restored position and newfound belonging. He'd still be waiting if you'd asked for a fortnight, Matilda observed, appearing with a basket to collect the morning's harvest. Men like that believe they need only wait for women to surrender. Eleanor sighed, brushing soil from her palms. It would secure my future, restore my family's honor. At what cost? The housekeeper's weathered face softened. Gold makes poor mortar for a life's foundation, my lady. By midday, Eleanor paced the North Tower's small chamber where she'd sought refuge from both men. From the window, she watched Gareth training with his men in the courtyard below. Since Percival's arrival, he'd maintained careful distance, offering neither counsel nor persuasion. Why won't he speak? She whispered to the empty room. Why won't he ask me to stay? Because he honors your choice, came the unbidden answer from her heart. Because unlike Percival, he sees you as more than property to claim. Evening found her in the great hall, standing before the same hearth where Percival had made his offer. The flames cast dancing shadows across tapestries that told tales of honor and loyalty, values Gareth embodied without proclamation. My lady. She turned to find him in the doorway, lamplight catching the silver at his temples. Have you reached your decision? He asked, voice carefully neutral. What would you have me do? Eleanor countered softly. Pain flashed across his features. I would have you follow your heart wherever it leads, even if, he faltered, then continued with quiet dignity, even if it leads away from Ravenwood. In that moment, looking upon this man who'd rescued her without demand, who'd seen her worth when others dismissed it, who now stood prepared to release her if it meant her happiness, Eleanor understood the tremulous feeling that had grown within. Her breast. Love. Not the tentative hope she'd once harbored for a marriage of convenience with Percival, but something fierce and certain that had taken root in fertile soil. She touched her mother's pendant, remembering her words. True wealth isn't measured in gold, Eleanor, but in how richly you are loved. And if my heart belongs at Ravenwood, she whispered. Gareth's eyes widened, cautious hope dawning in their depths. Then Ravenwood would count itself blessed beyond measure. Outside, Lord Percival waited for her answer. The path backward to security and status lay open before her, but ahead stretched something far more precious. Crimson and gold banners snapped in the autumn wind as Eleanor stood among the spectators. At the royal tournament grounds, nobility from across the realm had gathered for the king's annual competition, their finery creating a tapestry of colour against the trampled grass. Sir Gareth rode beside her, resplendent in his tournament armour, his expression focused beneath his open visor. "You needn't have come," he said quietly. "Percival will be here." "I won't hide," Eleanor replied, her hand briefly touching his armoured forearm. "Not any more." When Eleanor had rejected Lord Percival's proposition, his rage had been cold and calculating. "You'll regret this decision," he'd promised before departing Ravenwood. Now, as trumpets announced the tournament's commencement, she wondered what form his vengeance would take. The royal party arrived with ceremonial splendour, the king flanked by advisers, his crown glinting in the autumn sunlight. Gareth bowed deeply as his liege passed, earning a nod of recognition. For years he had served with quiet honour, his skill as a knight earning respect, despite his family's disavowal. Then Lord Percival appeared, mounted on his midnight charger, his armour gleaming, with ostentatious embellishment. His calculating gaze swept the gathering before fixing on Eleanor and Gareth with undisguised malice. The tournament master called for the first contests, but before proceedings could commence, Percival urged his horse forward, stopping directly before the royal dais. "My king," he proclaimed, voice carrying across the suddenly hushed grounds, "before these games begin, I seek justice for a grave offence against my honour." The king leaned forward, intrigued. "Speak, Lord Percival. I stand before you robbed of my betrothed." Percival's arm extended dramatically toward Eleanor. "Lady Eleanor of Rosewood was promised to me by formal arrangement, yet Sir Gareth has stolen her affections through dishonourable means." Gasps rippled through the crowd as hundreds of eyes turned toward Eleanor and Gareth. Shame burned her cheeks, but she stood tall, refusing to cower. "I challenge Sir Gareth to combat," Percival declared. "Not mere tournament sport, but true contest with sharpened steel. Let God determine where justice lies." Gareth moved forward, his face composed despite the public accusation. "My king, Lord Percival speaks falsely. He publicly rejected Lady Eleanor months ago, declaring her unworthy before the entire court." "Is this true?" the king demanded, looking toward the nobles who had witnessed the rejection. Before confirmation could come, Percival's voice cut through the murmurs. "Her unworthiness is precisely why I seek justice. What man of proper breeding would desire her unless through enchantment or deception?" Eleanor stepped forward, heart pounding. "My king, Enough," the king declared. "Lord Percival has issued challenge. Sir Gareth, do you accept?" Gareth's eyes met Eleanor's, a lifetime of promises passing between them in a heartbeat. "I do, your majesty." Dark clouds gathered over the tournament field as servants hastily erected a canopy for the king. The air hung heavy with the scent of rain and tension as Eleanor stood at the edge of the combat circle, her fingers white against the wooden barrier. Across the trampled earth, Gareth and Percival prepared for battle, squires fastening the last pieces of their armour. "He fights for you," Matilda whispered beside her. "Not for honour or king, but for you." Thunder rumbled in the distance as the combatants stepped into the circle. Gareth's armour was serviceable and well-maintained, but plain beside Percival's gilded ostentation. Yet it was Gareth who moved with the fluid grace of a man who had earned his skill through true combat rather than courtly exercises. The first drops of rain struck the dust as the herald raised his staff. "Let God's judgment be shown through." "Strength of arms!" Metal clashed against metal as the men came together with brutal force. Percival attacked with theatrical aggression, each blow designed to impress onlookers. Gareth fought with economy and precision, his defense seemingly effortless despite Percival's fury. Rain fell harder, turning the ground treacherous beneath their feet. The spectators huddled beneath cloaks and awnings, but Eleanor remained exposed, uncaring of the water soaking her gown. Each clash of swords sent jolts of terror through her heart. "Your knight falters," came Lord Percival's sister's voice, poison sweet beside her. "My brother trained with the finest masters in Christendom." As if hearing the taunt, Percival launched a flurry of attacks. Lightning split the sky, momentarily, blinding the combatants. In that instant, Percival's blade found a gap in Gareth's armor, drawing first blood. Eleanor's cry was lost in a crash of thunder. Gareth staggered, his left side darkening with spreading crimson. The crowd gasped collectively, anticipating his fall. Percival advanced, confidence radiating from his stance. "Yield, disowned knight." Percival called loudly enough for the king to hear. "She's not worth your life." Something shifted in Gareth's bearing. Through sheets of rain, Eleanor saw him straighten, saw his grip adjust on his sword. When he spoke, his voice carried despite the storm. "She is worth everything." What followed was no longer a tournament display, but the unleashing of a warrior's true skill. Gareth moved like lightning himself, each strike purposeful and devastating. Percival retreated, his earlier confidence dissolving into desperate defense. His foot slipped in the mud, and Gareth's blade swept upward, catching Percival's helmet and tearing it from his head. The lord fell backward, landing hard in the mud, his sword flying from his grasp. Gareth stood over him, blade at his throat, rain streaming down his armor and mingling with his blood. "Yield," Gareth commanded. Percival's face contorted with humiliation as he raised a trembling hand. "I yield." The king rose to his feet. "God has rendered judgment. Sir Gareth stands victorious." Eleanor rushed forward as Gareth turned toward her. His face pale from blood loss, but his eyes bright with triumph. Cherry blossoms drifted like snow across Ravenwood's courtyard, their delicate petals catching in Eleanor's hair as she moved among the guests gathered for the spring feast. 1 year had passed since she had stepped into Castle Highworth's great hall, heart filled with false hopes. 1 year since Lord Percival's cruel rejection had set her on an unexpected path. Today, Ravenwood bloomed with new life, not just in its gardens which flourished under her care, but in the spirit of the estate itself. No longer the refuge of a solitary knight, it had become a place of community, of healing, of purpose. "Your herb remedy saved my youngest this winter," the miller's wife said, pressing Eleanor's hands in gratitude. "We won't forget it, my lady." My lady. Once those words had represented an inherited status. Now they were offered freely, earned through care and service, rather than bloodline or wealth. Eleanor touched the silver pendant at her throat, her mother's final gift. Once a reminder of all she had lost, now a symbol of the strength she had discovered within herself. From the corner of her eye, she saw Sir Gareth speaking with the village elder, his scar from Percival's blade, now a faded line across his forearm. His gaze found hers across the courtyard, and the warmth in his eyes still kindled a flame within. "Her heart, he looks at you as if you hung the stars," Matilda observed, appearing beside her with a tray of spring cordials. "Has done since the day you decided to stay." Eleanor smiled, watching as Gareth excused himself and began making his way toward her. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened had Lord Percival not rejected me that day. Then you'd be the miserable lady of a grand castle instead of the beloved heart of Ravenwood," Matilda replied simply. As twilight painted the sky in watercolor hues, Gareth led Eleanor away from the festivities toward the ancient oak grove where he had once shared his own story of rejection. The trees had leafed out in vibrant green, their massive trunks standing sentinel over generations of secrets and promises. "Do you remember when we sat here last autumn?" Gareth asked, his voice gentle as they reached the fallen log that had been their bench during many conversations. "When you revealed your ducal heritage?" Eleanor smiled. I recall thinking I understood you better in that moment than I had anyone before. We were both carrying wounds then, he said, taking her hands in his. You fresh from rejection, me from years of solitude. Fireflies began to appear among the darkening trees, their soft illumination mirroring the stars emerging overhead. Eleanor watched one land briefly on their joined hands, a living spark of light. I came to Ravenwood, believing I'd lost everything worth having, she whispered. How wrong I was. Gareth's eyes shone in the gentle light. I once told you that you had brought something special to this place, but that was only the beginning. He released her hands, reaching instead for something tucked inside his tunic, a small circlet woven of silver wire with a single pearl at its center. You've transformed mere shelter into a home, turned my solitary existence into a life of purpose and connection. The world seemed to still around them as he knelt before her, the knight who had faced death for her honor, now humbling himself for her love. I ask not as your rescuer or protector, but as a man who has found his heart's match, Gareth said, his voice steady but vulnerable. Lady Eleanor of Rosewood, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not for lands or titles or obligations, but because two souls once wounded have found healing in each other? Tears blurred Eleanor's vision as she looked upon this man who had seen her worth when she herself had forgotten it. The path from rejected bride to cherished partner had been neither straight nor easy, but every step had led her here, to this perfect moment of clarity. Yes, she whispered, the word carrying all the certainty her heart had ever known. 1,000 times, yes. As Gareth slipped the ring onto her finger, Eleanor understood the truth that had eluded her in Castle Highworth's grand hall. True worth was never measured in dowries or titles, but in the courage to rise from rejection, the strength to forge one's own path, and the wisdom to recognize love not as a transaction, but as a transformation.